What if you woke up one morning, expecting nothing more than a regular day, only to find your world turned upside down by a single chilling question? How could 5 children vanish into thin air, never to return home? How does a simple outing on a sunny afternoon transform into one of the most haunting mysteries a nation has ever faced? And why, even decades later, does the mere mention of this case bring tears to the eyes of so many? In the heart of Daegu, South Korea, a city where vibrant marketplaces hum with life and the surrounding mountains offer a sanctuary from urban hustle, such questions became a painful reality. This was a city known for its resilience, where tradition and progress walked hand in hand, but no amount of tradition or progress could prepare the people of Daegu, or the entire country, for the tragedy that unfolded one seemingly ordinary spring day. The year was 1991. And South Korea was on the cusp of transformation, straddling its rich cultural heritage and the promise of a modern future. Families gathered for meals, children played freely in the streets, and the air was alive with the sound of life moving forward. For the parents, in one close-knit neighborhood in Daegu, March 26 was expected to be like any other, the day filled with laughter, warmth, and routine. But by the end of that day, laughter would turn to silence, warmth to dread, and routine to chaos. The questions came first. Small ones at first, the kind every parent might ask when their child isn't home on time. Why aren't they answering? Could they have lost track of time? But as the sun set and the hours dragged on, those small questions began to snowball into something much darker. Where are they? What could have happened to them? How does an entire group of children simply vanish? By the time the night had fully descended, fear was palpable. Families searched the streets, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Neighbors joined in, voices calling out into the quiet night. But there were no answers, no signs of the boys. It was as if they had disappeared into the void, and that's how the nightmare began. What started as a neighborhood's concern soon grew into a national obsession. The case would become a symbol of heartbreak, unanswered questions, and unrelenting grief. It would expose the frailty of trust, the failures of institutions, and the terrifying reality that even in the most peaceful places, danger can lurk unseen. But this story isn't just about a mystery. It's about a nation brought to its knees by unimaginable sorrow. It's about parents who refuse to give up hope despite the odds. It's about a community's relentless search for answers, and the haunting discoveries that only deepened the pain. So, as we peel back the layers of this harrowing tale, one burning question remains. Could this tragedy have been prevented? And if so, who is truly to blame? What happened to those 5 boys on that fateful day in 1991 will both captivate you and break your heart. Because this isn't just a story of a disappearance. It's a story of innocence lost, of lives forever changed, and of a nation that still mourns. The answers may never come, but the questions will linger. And so will the sorrow. Stay with us as we unravel a mystery that shook South Korea to its core. March 26, 1991 began as an ordinary spring day in Daegu, South Korea. The city buzzed with the energy of a public holiday, its streets alive with the hum of families taking advantage of a rare break from routine. For 5 boys from a small neighborhood, it was the perfect day for adventure. Woo Chol-won, Jo Ho-yeon, Kim Mun-yeol, Park Chang-in, and Kim Jong-sik were full of youthful energy and excitement as they hatched their plan for the day. Mount Waryeong, a towering presence just outside their neighborhood, was their destination. A playground of nature, it was a place they knew well, a patchwork of streams, wooded trails, and the promise of hidden treasures. Their mission? To hunt for salamander eggs. Small, jelly-like orbs they had collected many times before, trophies of a day spent with makeshift tools in hand, old jars, sticks, and a sense of endless possibility. The boys set off under the bright midday sun. They were a tight-knit group, each boy adding his voice to the chorus of laughter and chatter that echoed down the streets as they walked toward the mountain. Their excitement was infectious. Those who saw them couldn't help but smile. As the boys disappeared into the foothills of Mount Warryong, time seemed to slow for them, consumed by the joy of exploration. The mountain was their haven, a place where their imaginations ran wild. They could have been pirates searching for buried treasure, explorers discovering uncharted lands, or scientists conducting a grand expedition. But as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson, the ordinary day began to take on an ominous tone. The mountain, once a place of wonder, now seemed vast and unyielding. Shadows stretched long across the trails, the dense foliage swallowing the golden light. The sounds of nature, once comforting, grew louder in the stillness. The boys, so carefree when they had set out, were now conspicuously absent. Back in the neighborhood, the usual hum of dinner preparation and chatter began to mix with quiet unease. Parents, accustomed to their children pushing the boundaries of curfew, exchanged casual remarks at first. They must have lost track of time, someone suggested. But as the minutes turned into hours, that casual confidence began to erode. One mother paced the small confines of her home, glancing repeatedly at the door. Another father stepped outside, his eyes scanning the dimly lit streets as if expecting to see the boys come running down at any moment. Yet there was only silence, broken by the occasional bark of a dog or the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. By the time the stars emerged, their cold, indifferent light casting a glow over the quiet city, an unsettling question hung heavy in the air. Where were they? For the boys, the night brought a chill that seeped into the heart of every parent. No one wanted to admit it, but the comforting belief that they were simply running late no longer seemed plausible. The boys had vanished, swallowed by the mountain or something far more sinister. The thought gnawed at everyone. Mount Warryong had always been a source of joy for the children, a place where memories were made, not lost. What could have gone wrong? Could they have wandered too far, deeper into the forest than they'd ever dared before? Could they have encountered something or someone they weren't prepared for? The questions were endless and the answers elusive. In that moment, the mountain wasn't just a towering mass of earth and trees. It was an enigma, holding secrets it wasn't ready to give up. And so the night deepened, the city of Daegu falling into an uneasy sleep. But for the families of Woo Chol-won, Jo Ho-yeon, Kim Yong-ju, Park Chan-in, and Kim Jong-sik, rest was impossible. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would consume not just their lives, but the heart of a nation. As the mystery of the boys' disappearance began to unfold, one thing was certain: the idyllic peace of their neighborhood would never be the same again. The shadows of Mount Warryong had swallowed their children whole, and what those shadows concealed would haunt South Korea for decades. As dawn broke over the city of Daegu on March 27, 1991, the eerie quiet of the previous night gave way to a flurry of anxious activity. The once peaceful streets buzzed with whispers and hurried footsteps as neighbors gathered outside the boys' homes. Parents, faces etched with desperation, called out their sons' names into the crisp morning air, hoping for a response that never came. The gravity of the situation became undeniable. By mid-morning, small search parties had formed. Fathers, brothers, and friends grabbed flashlights, ropes, and sticks, heading towards Mount Warryong with grim determination. They moved methodically, calling out, their voices echoing in the dense foliage. But the mountain, with its sprawling trails and shadowed undergrowth, was a labyrinth. The searchers soon realized that finding the boys would not be as simple as retracing their usual paths. Mount Warryong seemed to stretch infinitely, its creeks and caves hiding secrets that refused to be uncovered. By the second day, the local police were called in. Officers scoured the area, their uniforms a stark contrast against the vibrant greens and browns of the mountain. The investigation was no longer just a community effort, it was an official matter. Missing posters began to appear across Daegu, plastered on telephone poles, shop windows, and bus stops. Each poster carried the same haunting images: 5 smiling faces, frozen in happier times. News of the disappearance quickly spread. Within days, the case dominated national headlines. South Korea, a nation on the cusp of modernization, found itself united by shared grief and a burning need for answers. The public demanded action. President Roh Tae-woo himself took notice of the case. Under pressure from a grieving nation, he ordered an unprecedented mobilization of resources. Hundreds of soldiers and police officers joined the search, transforming Mount Waryeong into a hive of activity. Helicopters flew overhead, their rotors chopping through the air, while dogs sniffed tirelessly at the ground. For weeks, the mountain became the center of South Korea's collective attention. Searchers waded through streams, climbed steep inclines, and pushed through dense underbrush. Every crevice was explored, every hollow tree inspected. The search parties left no stone unturned, literally. Rocks were overturned, leaves raked aside, and shallow pits dug in the hopes of uncovering some trace of the boys. Yet, despite the exhaustive efforts, the mountain seemed to taunt them with its silence. No torn fabric, no discarded shoe, no clue hinted at where the boys might have gone. It was as if Mount Waryeong had swallowed them whole, leaving no trace of their existence behind. The lack of progress frustrated not just the searchers, but an entire nation. Speculation ran rampant. Some theorized the boys had fallen victim to an accident, perhaps trapped in an unmarked cave or swept away by an unexpected current. Others whispered darker possibilities, their imaginations conjuring up abductions or foul play. Media outlets amplified the mystery. Television screens displayed the boys' photos day and night, their youthful faces becoming a symbol of lost innocence. Reporters descended on Daegu, their microphones thrust towards grieving parents and anxious neighbors. The family's pain was palpable, their pleas for help heartbreaking. One mother, clutching a photograph of her son, broke down during a televised interview. "Please," she sobbed. "If anyone has seen my boy, bring him back to me." Her words echoed across the nation, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who heard them. Even schoolchildren in distant cities felt the weight of the tragedy. They watched the news with wide, fearful eyes, gripping their parents' hands a little tighter. Teachers held discussions in classrooms, urging students to be cautious and to stick close to home. The disappearance of the Frog Boys, as they came to be known, became a national obsession, a haunting mystery that reverberated across South Korea. As the days turned into weeks, the hope for a miracle began to wane. But still, the search continued, driven by the aching hearts of parents who refused to give up and the determined efforts of those who could not, in good conscience, stop looking for the lost children. The air was thick with tension. Every day brought new theories, new leads, none of which led anywhere. A farmer reported seeing the boys near the base of the mountain, but when investigators arrived, the area revealed nothing. A woman claimed she saw the boys in a distant village, but again, nothing. Every potential clue seemed to crumble under scrutiny, leaving only more questions. The mounting frustration reached a breaking point. People began to wonder, if not on the mountain, where could they be? Had the boys been taken, and if so, by whom? The fear of abduction, once a distant possibility, started to feel more real as rumors swelled. The search now had a dual purpose. Find the boys, yes, but also to uncover what had happened to them. The deeper the investigation went, the more the nation began to feel that something more sinister might be at play. And as the shadows lengthened, so did the suspicion. No one knew where to look next. With each passing day, the reality that the boys might never return slowly sank in, yet in the hearts of their families a glimmer of hope remained. What else could they do but wait, pray, and continue searching? They were unwilling to accept the unthinkable, that Mount Waryeong, with all its mysteries, might forever guard the fate of the Frog Boys. But as the search slowly petered out, and the days stretched into months, a new layer of darkness began to unfold. Behind the scenes, authorities grappled with growing public pressure and unanswered questions. If the boys weren't on the mountain, where could they have gone? Were there any clues that had been overlooked? And then, just as the hopes of South Korea were beginning to fade, a discovery was made. But it was a discovery that would stir the darkest fears, one that would shatter what little was left of the nation's peace. The search wasn't over, but the questions were only just beginning. For 11 years, the shadows of Mount Weriong loomed large over the families of Woo Chol-won, Jo Hol-yeon, Kim Yong-sik, Park Chan-in, and Kim Jong-sik. Despite the passage of time, the pain of their disappearance remained raw. For their parents, hope was both a lifeline and a cruel torment. Every phone call, every knock at the door, brought a flicker of anticipation that quickly faded into despair. The world moved on, but for the families of the Frog Boys, time had stood still. Then, on September 26, 2002, the mountain finally gave up its terrible secret. Two men, wandering through the dense forest in search of acorns, stumbled upon something that would change everything. At first, it seemed like an ordinary find, a few scattered bones protruding from the earth. But as they looked closer, dread washed over them. These weren't animal remains. They were human. The authorities were alerted immediately, and within hours the area was cordoned off. The once quiet mountainside became a hive of activity as forensic teams and investigators descended upon the site. The discovery sent shockwaves through South Korea, rekindling memories of the boys' disappearance and stirring up the collective grief of a nation. For the families, it was as if their worst fears had been confirmed. And yet, the discovery raised more questions than it answered. The remains, partially buried in a shallow ditch, were quickly identified as belonging to the 5 boys. Their tattered clothing was still intact in some areas, hauntingly familiar to their parents who had memorized every detail of what they wore that fateful day. Shoes, backpacks, and fragments of fabric lay scattered across the site, a tragic reminder of the innocence that had been lost. But it wasn't just the discovery of the remains that sent chills through the community. It was the condition in which they were found. Forensic analysis revealed chilling details that hinted at a far more sinister fate. 3 of the boys showed clear signs of skull fractures, injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. The fractures were precise and deliberate, suggesting violence rather than an accident. Nearby, investigators reportedly found what appeared to be bullets and other small metallic objects, though these findings would later become points of contention. As the forensic teams worked tirelessly to piece together the events that had led to this grim discovery, the parents of the boys gathered at the site, their faces etched with anguish. For years they had begged for answers, and now that they were finally within reach, the truth felt unbearable. The media swarmed the area, broadcasting the heart-wrenching images of parents clutching their children's belongings, their tears a reflection of a nation's sorrow. What had happened to the boys? How had they remained hidden for over a decade, despite the massive search efforts? And most hauntingly, who or what was responsible for their deaths? Theories began to swirl. Some speculated that the boys had stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see, a clandestine military operation perhaps, or an illegal activity hidden deep within the mountain. Others believed they had been victims of a deranged individual, someone who had lured them into the forest with malicious intent. The presence of blunt force trauma and the mysterious metallic objects only added fuel to these theories, suggesting a deliberate act of violence. But there was another possibility, one that was equally disturbing. Had the boys been caught in a tragic accident, their deaths covered up to protect powerful interests? The mountain, once a place of childhood adventure, now seemed shrouded in secrets, its silence more oppressive than ever. As the remains were transported for further analysis, the questions loomed larger than ever. The discovery was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would delve deeper into the darkness surrounding Mount Weriong. The Frog Boys had finally been found, but the mystery of their disappearance was far from solved, and so the nation held its breath once more, waiting for answers that seemed just out of reach. The next steps would take investigators into the murky waters of conspiracy, suspicion, and the lengths to which some would go to hide the truth. As the world watched, one thing was clear: the story of the Frog Boys was far from over. The discovery of the boys' remains, far from offering solace, plunged South Korea into a vortex of questions and speculation. While investigators pored over the evidence, the public became consumed by theories that sought to explain how 5 children could meet such a horrific end and remain hidden for over a decade. Theories that ranged from plausible to chillingly sinister began to emerge, each one deepening the enigma surrounding Mount Verreong. The first and most widely debated theory was the military cover-up. Mount Verreong was located near a military shooting range, a detail that had been quietly dismissed during the initial search efforts in 1991. Some speculated that the boys had wandered too close to the range during live fire exercises. Could they have been struck by stray bullets? The presence of metallic objects near their remains, initially rumored to be bullets, seemed to support this possibility. Eyewitnesses from the area had also reported hearing loud noises resembling gunfire on the day the boys went missing. Yet, if this were true, why had their bodies been hidden for so long? Why had there been no admission of responsibility from the military, until all reports began to appear of people seeing bullets other than bodies, which were crowning and roaring in the original drama? The idea of a cover-up gained traction when inconsistencies in the investigation were brought to light. It was revealed that the military had restricted search efforts in certain areas of the mountain during the initial search, citing safety concerns. Some questioned whether these restrictions were meant to protect the public or to keep them away from damning evidence. The theory suggested that the boys' deaths were an accident, but the cover-up was deliberate, orchestrated to shield the reputation of the armed forces. However, despite public pressure, no concrete evidence ever surfaced to confirm this theory. The second theory took a darker turn, pointing to foul play. The blunt force trauma to the boys' skulls was not consistent with an accident. It hinted at an intentional act of violence. Investigators proposed that the boys may have encountered someone with sinister motives, someone who viewed them as a threat or a target. But who would want to harm 5 young children? And why? Some speculated that the boys had stumbled upon illegal activity in the forest, perhaps a drug operation or an unauthorized mining site, and had been silenced to protect the perpetrators. Mount Verreong, with its dense forest and isolated paths, was an ideal location for illicit dealings. Could the boys have unknowingly witnessed something they weren't meant to see? The methodical nature of their deaths suggested premeditation, adding an air of cold calculation to this theory. The third theory was perhaps the most chilling of all, that their deaths had been deliberate and orchestrated by someone who knew the mountain intimately. The precise location where the remains were found was remote and difficult to access, a place only a local or an expert would know to hide a crime. This theory proposed the existence of a predator, someone who had lured the boys into the forest under the guise of an adventure or a harmless encounter. The eerie possibility of a serial killer or a mentally disturbed individual sent shivers through the nation, as the thought of such malice existing in their community was almost unbearable. Adding to the intrigue, accounts from local residents hinted at strange occurrences around the time of the boys' disappearance. Reports of unidentified figures wandering near the base of Mount Verreong, unexplained noises in the night, and even rumors of occult activity in the area began to circulate. While much of this was dismissed as hearsay, it painted a picture of a region shrouded in secrets, where the truth was as elusive as the shadows among the trees. Media outlets, now ravenous for answers, amplified these theories, turning the tragedy into a national obsession. Experts in criminology and forensic science were brought in to analyze every detail, from the positioning of the remains to the peculiar objects found near the site. Psychologists weighed in on the potential profiles of those responsible, while investigative journalists delved into the boys' last known activities, interviewing anyone who might offer a clue. Yet with every new theory came more questions. Why had the remains surfaced after 11 years? Was it coincidence, or had someone deliberately chosen that moment to expose the crime? And what about the missing pieces of the puzzle? The items that were never recovered, the gaps in the timeline, the lack of eyewitness accounts. As the nation grappled with these possibilities, the families of the Frog Boys found themselves caught in a storm of speculation and scrutiny. Their grief was compounded by the public's demand for answers, the constant reliving of their loss as every new theory gained traction. For them, the theories were not just stories, they were potential truths, each one more devastating than the last. And yet, amidst the whirlwind of speculation, one unsettling fact remained. The truth, whatever it was, lay buried deep within the shadows of Mount Verreong. The theories, no matter how compelling, were fragments of a larger picture, pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. As the dust settled on the relentless speculation, the case of the Frog Boys became more than just a tragic story. It became a symbol of systemic failure, an unresolved wound that continued to bleed long after the boys were laid to rest. For the families, the passage of time offered no solace. The theories that swirled around their sons' deaths were cold comfort in the face of a justice system that had let them down. And for South Korea, the case revealed uncomfortable truths about the fragility of innocence in a rapidly modernizing society. The Frog Boys case sent shockwaves through the nation, exposing the critical flaws in how missing person cases were handled. In the aftermath of the boys' disappearance, South Korea's initial response was chaotic and disorganized. From the bungled search efforts to the delayed realization that this was no mere case of children lost in the woods, the cracks in the investigative process became glaringly obvious. Local law enforcement, woefully unequipped to handle a case of this magnitude, had been overwhelmed, and critical early leads were likely lost forever. Public outrage over the case forced the government to confront these shortcomings. In the years following the discovery of the boys' remains, sweeping reforms were introduced. Specialized task forces for missing children were established, ensuring that such cases would receive immediate and thorough attention. Advances in forensic technology, such as DNA testing and digital tracking, were prioritized, enabling more effective responses to similar tragedies in the future. The Frog Boys had unwittingly become catalysts for change, their loss a tragic wake-up call for a nation that had overlooked the importance of safeguarding its most vulnerable. But for the families of the boys, no reform could ever fill the void left behind. The expiration of the statute of limitations for the case in 2006 was a devastating blow. It meant that, even if a suspect were identified, legal action could no longer be taken. The families, who had clung to the hope of justice for over a decade, found themselves facing the crushing reality that they might never know the truth. And yet, they continued to fight, not just for their sons, but for all the children who might one day face similar. Their perseverance, along with the public's continued fascination with the case, eventually led to a monumental shift. In 2015, South Korea abolished the statute of limitations for first-degree murder. This landmark decision reignited hope, albeit faint, that the case could one day be reopened if new evidence emerged. Forensic advancements, coupled with renewed public interest, kept the possibility alive that the shadows surrounding Mount Waryeong might one day give up their secrets. Near the site where the boys were discovered, a memorial now stands, a solemn reminder of lives lost too soon, engraved with the names of the 5 boys, Woo Chol-won, Cho Ho-yeon, Kim Yong-gyu, Kim Jong-sik, and Park Chan-in. It serves as a tribute to their memory and a stark symbol of the unanswered questions that still haunt their story. The memorial is a place of mourning, but also of reflection, where visitors are reminded of the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of a world that failed to protect its children. Over the years, the case has taken on a life of its own, evolving into folklore, whispered about in hushed tones and analyzed endlessly in documentaries and online forums. Some believe the answers are still out there, waiting to be discovered. Others fear the truth may never be known, lost forever in the folds of time. But one thing remains certain: the Frog Boys will never be forgotten. Their story has etched itself into the collective memory of a nation, a haunting reminder of the pain that lingers when justice is denied and the truth remains elusive. If you believe every child deserves to be protected and that no child's life should ever be cut short in such a horrifying manner, subscribe to this channel. Only those who believe it's acceptable to let these tragedies continue without justice would choose not to. And as we keep these boys in our memories, let's ask ourselves, what more can we do to ensure stories like theirs are never repeated? The legacy of the Frog Boys is not just a cautionary tale, it's a call to action.